This program contains sensitive content which some may find disturbing and inappropriate for younger audiences. Viewer discretion is advised.
Welcome to Strategies for Strongholds. I'm Michael Carducci, and this is my very dear friend, Dr. Jill Schwirzer. It's good to have you here today, Jennifer.
It's great to be here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, you know something, this is a very personal, I think, presentation for me, because at 4 years old, I thought that I was born in the wrong gender. I thought that I was a girl from my very first conscious thought. But, you know, thinking about how Jesus actually left his identity and came down and put on mortality, you know, I can start to see that, you know, he does understand what it's like to be me. And there are different psychological and physiological reasons why somebody may reject the biology that they're born into.
For various reasons. You know,
Right.
We're not always comfortable in our own skin. And it's
Yeah.
so comforting to know that he came into a human body, which was in a fallen, you know, human flesh, which he definitely wouldn't have preferred for himself, but
Right.
he came for us.
So while Jesus wasn't transgender, he
No.
does understand what it's like to be trapped in a body that you wouldn't
That you don't
necessarily
really-
choose.
But he chose, he wasn't trapped so much as he chose to be in that body for
Right.
us. So,
Right.
but he knows what it's like not to feel at home in his own skin. Yeah.
Very cool. So, with
Yeah.
that being said,
Yeah.
we want to basically talk about some of the statistics and
Yeah.
also some of the current situation of what's going on with transgenderism.
Yeah.
So, my very first question for you is, what is transgenderism?
What is it? Okay, so I'm going to give the clinical diagnosis for it. It's clinically significant distress or impairment related to a strong desire to be of another gender, but there's a little bit of history.
Okay.
So the diagnostic manual of the American Psychiatric Association is called the DSM, and it's on its 5th edition, so it's the DSM-5. And that revision came about in 2013.
It's the Bible for diagnoses,
It's the Bible for
right?
diagnoses for psychological disorders. So before 2014 is the DSM-4, and other, you know, iterations of it before that called it gender identity disorder. But what happened was the same-sex attraction, homosexuality, had been normalized in 1973 when it was taken out of the diagnostic manual because they didn't want to call it a pathology. And the transgender community said, we also don't want to be pathologized, so we don't like this gender identity disorder. There's nothing pathological about being a male, wanting to be a female, or the other way around. So they changed it because the problem was you can't get treatment, i.e. hormones and surgeries and this, without a diagnosis. So they had to have a diagnosis, not like homosexuality, you don't need treatment for that, but or at least you don't need treatment in the conventional way of looking at it, but they needed these hormones, these medical interventions. So what happened was they found a way to diagnose it without calling the condition of wanting to be the other sex pathological. Now they call it gender dysphoria. So it's that you're dysphoric, i.e. distressed, about being in a male body when you believe you're a female, or the other way around.
Okay.
So as long as there's clinical significant distress, then that's sufficient reason to be diagnosed, and then you can receive treatment.
So I think it's fair to clarify that we're not talking about somebody that is asexual or somebody that is born with and ambiguous genitalia, right? We're talking about somebody that's completely male or completely female that is not connected with their biology.
And that's a great point. So those are called disorders of sexual development, and they're really an entirely different situation than transgenderism. So disorders of sexual development are extremely rare, for one thing. But they are conditions, and there are a variety of them. There are some where the DNA doesn't match the genitalia. There's some that the genitalia never mature into either male or female. There's one, it's typical of island countries, where the individual will be female until puberty, and all of a sudden they develop female or male genitalia. So there's just a lot of things that can go wrong with sexual development. That's why they're called disorders of sexual development or intersex. And they physically do not develop into male or female.
Okay, so the argument that I've heard, even in Christian community, is that, you know, somebody is born that way, that's intentional by God. Could we address that for a second?
Yeah, so that's what's happening right now in the social context or the cultural zeitgeist, and that is that the idea of sex being binary, male or female, and the conditions we were just talking about being a disorder of some kind. Now what's happening is the binary is being rejected, and it is believed that gender is a rainbow of options between male and female.
Like a spectrum.
That's right.
Okay.
And so you have things like this. You have lists of terminology: agender, androgynous, bigender, cisgender, or is it cisgender?
Cisgender.
Male to female, feminine of center, feminine presenting, femme, gender creative, gender diverse, gender expansive, gender fluid, gender nonconforming, gender queer, gender variant, male to female, masculine of center, masculine presenting, pangender, stealth. I don't know what that is. Do you?
No.
No. They, them, third gender, trans, transgender, trans man, transsexual, transvestite, trans woman, two-spirit, and then sometimes people use Z and Zer for the pronoun.
Okay.
So I'm just reading all that because it's incredible how many varieties we're coming up with.
Jennifer, you have like maybe 20 there, and there are over 100 different identities now that people can identify with.
Just for gender.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's no end to the variations on a theme once you reject the idea of sex being either male or female. You can be anything in between. And that's the thinking that has come to the fore in our culture.
Right.
Yeah.
So how prevalent is transgenderism?
About 0.6% in the general population, but once you get into Gen Z, it goes up to 2%. So that's like a huge leap from less than 0.5% really to 2%. So it's quadruple the rate. And so we have to ask ourselves why. So there's a few different theories as to why that's happening. So I like to say it this way. I like to say it awareness, trending, and looping. So let me take those one by one.
Yeah, let's break that down.
So, okay, awareness is because there's a greater awareness of the fact that people can be transgender, et cetera. More people are, oh, well, that's what was going on with me this whole time. And so they're matching their own experience with the classification, so to speak. And that may account for some of the situations we're seeing, but most people who are really thinking carefully about this don't think that's the entire explanation, because human nature is complex.
Right.
So the second one is trending. You know, it's what you might call social contagion, where people see these things happening, particularly young people, and they see, for instance, a young person finally realizing who they really are, and then being applauded for being so authentic, for transitioning, and this type of thing. And that is, you know, very cool to a young person. They're getting all this attention. It looks exciting. It looks like they're finally, you know, feeling who they really are, which most young people are struggling with.
Right.
And so you've got that factor.
So can I speak to that for just a second?
Please.
At 4 years old, I felt like I was a girl trapped in a boy's body. So by the time...
Let me ask you this though, was it because it was popular, or was it just what you were experiencing?
No, it's what I was experiencing.
Right.
But
so there are some of those cases.
right, and back in the 60s, they didn't have, you know, puberty blockers and that kind of promotion of it. But honestly, when I look at it, Jennifer, even until I was up to 20 years old, I would have had that sex change. And if they had the laws back then that they have today, I would have been standing first in line. Without a doubt, that would have been me.
You would have wanted to transition.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then you would never have become who you are today.
Right. But I want to speak to the fact that it's trendy. You know, in the United Kingdom, in England, there was 1,000% increase on transgenderism among children.
Right.
And now the statistic 2 years later is 3,000% increase on transgenderism.
So it's just exploding.
Absolutely.
Okay, so there's a third causative factor here, and to account for the explosion, and that's what you call looping. So what happens is the experts, people in my field and people that are way beyond me in my field, come up with these classifications. So you have a whole list of things like this. And the reality is that those classifications may identify what some people are already experiencing, but people also interact with the classification itself, and they will start to conform to those classifications. So let me give you an example of another situation where this happened. This is back in the 70s and 80s. There was a diagnosis called multiple personality. It's now called dissociative identity disorder, but you remember the craze of multiple personalities.
I remember.
So
I remember the movie.
It was never really diagnosed until the 70s. Then a few psychologists started diagnosing it. And then there was this explosion after, I think, the movie, and it became more of a kind of a pop thing, you know. And the movie was Sally Fields, who was a very popular actress, and she played this character, Sybil, who had multiple personalities. And And it just kind of took off as what you might call a social contagion. From there, many people started to believe that they had multiple personalities. So the number of diagnoses coming forward was greatly multiplied, and also the number of personalities these people had increased. And so there was this explosion. And then there was a very, I think, reductionist explanation for why this condition happens, and that was that people had sexual abuse in childhood, and that explained everything. So if you had multiple personalities and you were sexually abused in childhood, you had to match that classification and that narrative, basically, so you would bring up these memories. Because you had to have been sexually abused to have this condition. So then you have this memory retrieval craze where people are starting to go to their counselor, and the counselor is questioning them, and they're finally, oh yeah, I was abused in childhood. And then there's these false memory phenomena. So you can see that the experts that create these classifications can, in and of themselves, create a forward motion toward these things.
Wow.
That's called looping.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so what are the effects of the looping and the trending and the other category that you gave us?
Well, just an increase in cases.
Yeah.
You know, we just see more and more cases of this kind of thing. And the typical explanation is, well, you know, it's always been there. It's just that now we're aware of this. Now we're sort of lifting the restrictions and the stigma. But most people that are really thinking carefully about it know that it's beyond that. In fact, there's a lady who's a liberal and is, you know, very pro like sex change and pro same-sex relationships. Her name is Abigail Schreier, and she has written a book called Irreversible Damage, where she points out that there's a huge spike, particularly among young females, in transgender and transgender treatment and even surgery. And she says this about it. It's really interesting. She says that it is among high anxiety, depressive, mostly white girls who in previous decades fell prey to anorexia and bulimia or multiple personality disorder. So young females that tended toward neuroticism, what we might call neuroticism, and these women are now coming out as transgender. So she suggests strongly that there's a social contagion or looping phenomena going on. And she's not even a conservative at all. She's not coming from that place. She's just noticing this spike. And the thing is that traditionally, transgenderism was diagnosed more the age that you're talking about, you had onset. It's always been a reality, and we're not denying that. Let's just get that out on the table. This happens.
So what I love about God, even in His Word biblically, in Deuteronomy 22 verse 5, it says that, you know, a man shall not wear the clothing of a woman and vice versa, for it is an abomination. And so what I found really compassionate about that is that God didn't call me an abomination. He called the act of dressing like that an abomination. And here is what that was for me, because when my aunt would take me into the bathroom and style my hair like a girl, she didn't think that it had any power or any influence over me. I just thought it was cute. That's right. But when she styled my hair like a girl and I looked in the mirror and I already felt inadequate as a boy, rejected being male, I looked in the mirror and I thought, wow, I could actually be convincing. And for a child who doesn't know the difference between reality and fantasy, for me, that was the fuel, that was the catalyst or the turbo that really kept fueling this ideology in my mind that I could actually be convincing as a girl.
So the affirming approach to this kind of thing could actually catalyze what's already going on.
So could we even address, you know, something as simple as, you know, sisters dressing up their little brother as a girl and giggling and smirking and thinking that that's cute, but you don't realize
the effect it could have,
the power
depending
of
on
that
the
influence.
child.
That's right. That's right. Some kids may be able to, you know, to be able to survive that and not have any long-term trauma, but other kids that have that sensitivity, for them, I believe that that's why God said that this isn't right, that boys need to be dressing as boys and girls as girls.
Well, and maybe we should discuss the treatments, because there's basically 3 approaches to quote-unquote treating transgenderism as it presents clinically. The first is to try to get the child to act like their biological sex. That I would call changing. So you're trying to change. They want to go this way. You try to change them back to acting in accord with their biological sex. And then there's waiting, or what they call watchful waiting, because clinicians, people like me, people that study, know that about 80 or more % of these cases, the person desists, is what they call it. They stop feeling the way that they're feeling when they're going through this period of wanting to be the opposite sex.
So can I jump in for just a second? Because that was my situation. I totally felt that even as a Christian, that I needed to be a female even for God to accept me, because at puberty I had same-sex attraction. I never had it before, but from the age of 4, feeling like I was trapped in the wrong sex. Then when puberty came, again, the sex that was a mystery becomes the attraction. So I wasn't getting the affirmation and the acceptance and love from males. I was called sissy, queer little girl. So what that did is that pushed even further away masculine affirmation. So then it became sexualized at puberty. So then as a Christian, I thought, well, you know, if I'm attracted to the same sex, if I have a sex change, then God will be okay with not only my identity, but also my attraction.
So were you saying that you thought that same-sex sex was wrong? So if you would just change your sex,
everything would be all right.
Then you'd be moral.
Yeah. So here was the dilemma that, you know, at 20 years old, I walked away from Christianity because that wasn't working. I wasn't finding the answers or bringing my sexuality and my religion to come together. So at 20 years old, I totally turned my back on God and just went into the gay culture.
Wow.
But the reality was, in the gay culture, I found that masculinity was more valuable than femininity. So if I worked out in the gym, if I butched it up a little bit more, I found that I got the attention from men that I'd always wanted. The problem wasn't that I wanted to be a girl. The issue was I wanted to be accepted. Yes. It was a hunger. So,
well, how might that hunger have been met if life had been perfect for you? I mean, can you give me an idea?
I can't. Like, that is unfathomable.
Well, your dad, right?
Right. Well, it's interesting because somebody made this comment. They said relationships form identity. And I balked at that at first, and I thought, no, that doesn't make sense. But it does.
You don't develop identity in a vacuum. In fact, there's a huge amount of research that young people, identity development is greatly enhanced by service to the community, and particularly in a religious context, i.e. mission work. And that's, of course, engaging with other human beings.
For me, it was a detachment of my father. I had what's called defensive detachment, which is a clinical term. And so I didn't identify with my same-sex parent. Therefore, the only parent left for me was my mom. So at a very early age, even before consciousness, I was patterning already after her. So by the time I became conscious at 4 years old, my reality was, I don't want to be like him, I want to be like her. But the issue that I really wanted to get back to, you know, with that question was, you know, if I would have had those puberty blockers, which I would have been standing in line for.
That's the third treatment is basically transitioning.
Right, but I want to talk about, you know, my situation and how that relates to what's going on today. If I would have had those puberty blockers and then eventually had a sex change at 14 or 15.
Should you explain what that is? Do people know what puberty blockers are and all that? What's going on? Maybe we should explain that.
Well, let me get through,
okay,
and then we can unpack all of that. Is that okay?
All right, sure.
Yeah, because I don't want to lose my thought.
Okay.
So if I would have had a sex change at 14 or 15 years old, I would have had the sex that I wanted. But then, remember, at 20 years old, all of a sudden I realized, oh, it was okay to be a male, and I never struggled with transgender ideation again. So imagine
you grew out of it.
The mutilation that would have happened had I had that sex change.
Have you had the opportunity?
That's right. That's right. And then we were talking yesterday about.
And we don't know now how many people that are going through it now as kids are going to regret it down the road because they haven't come down the road yet.
There are YouTube videos that I have seen of people that have regretted the detransitioning. There's a young girl in England who actually sued the country and won because she says that the government stole her puberty. Yeah. As a matter of fact, she had the mutilating surgery, the hysterectomy, as well as having her mastectomy, double mastectomy.
So what's happening now is the transgenderism is being treated clinically by, you go to a counselor to get the diagnosis, but then pretty immediately after, and typically there are other issues with transgenderism. In fact, there's a higher percentage of autistic people in the transgender population. The high levels of anxiety, depression, of other forms of low self-esteem, this type of thing. So you're going to have a lot of other problems, but those things are not being treated, and that person is being escorted out into the medical system. As soon as they get that diagnosis, which they need to pursue this medical course, they're scooted out into a medical system where they're given first puberty blocker hormones if they're under the age of puberty, right?
Right. Do you want to talk about puberty blockers now?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So puberty blocker basically stops the puberty process so that the child doesn't go through the puberty process. And the idea is to help them to transition to be the sex that they desire more readily so that they don't have stronger jaws and more male features if they're male or female. Yeah, exactly.
Which the hormones that come into our bodies during puberty help make our bones stronger.
That's right.
So there's all kinds of questions about the long-term medical effect of these puberty blockers on bone development.
That's right.
Right. So we're going to see it down the road a little bit here. But then the next step, once you're given these puberty blockers, supposedly to buy you more time, which it really kind of does some damage because you stop developing at that moment. So say you go 5 years down the road and you're like, no, I do want to be a girl. But everything's been atrophied.
They didn't just stop the puberty process. They also started the puberty process for the opposite sex. A young boy in Australia told his mother that he was a girl. Mother took her son to the doctor, and they said, oh, he has gender dysphoria. They put him on the hormone blockers or puberty blockers. And then by the time he was 14 years old, he had already developed breasts. His voice didn't change. His facial features were feminized. And he said to his mother, he goes, oh, I realized I made a mistake. I'm not a girl, I'm a boy. So now he had to have those breasts removed, and now he has to go to a voice coach to learn how to speak more manly. All of that because we allowed a child that doesn't understand the difference between reality and fantasy to decide what their sex is.
Now, depending on the state that you live in the United States, there are some states where it's legal, some states where it's not legal. There's just a lot of chaos going on, frankly, right now with laws and procedures. But you're right. The next step is to then give these opposite sex hormones to an individual who's been blocked from puberty so that they start developing the secondary sex characteristics of the opposite sex. And then the third step is, top surgery and then bottom surgery to change the anatomy. And what an incredible step to take with someone whose brain isn't fully baked yet. But what we're doing is we're yielding to the desires of children, and it is really kind of almost criminalized to ask the parents to actually parent their child and say, no, you can't have that right now.
It has been criminalized. There have been parents that have divorced or whatever, and one parent is for the sex change and the other is not, and they go to court, and it's typical that the parent that doesn't want the sex change is the one that's criminalized.
So depending on where you are, this kind of thing can happen. Now, it's very interesting. I live in Florida, and I get an email once a week from the Department of Health. And I got this email a little while ago where they were talking about transgender treatment, and they said that they were quoting a review that said hormonal treatments for transgender adolescents can achieve their intended physical effects. It can change you to another sex and feminize or masculinize your body. But evidence regarding their psychosocial and cognitive impact is generally lacking. And so because of this, the state of Florida has taken a stand that social gender transition should not be a treatment option for children or adolescents. Anyone under 18 should not be prescribed puberty blockers. Gender reassignment surgery should not be a treatment option for children or adolescents. And then they go on to quote, the various surgeries that take place, and they say that those have an unacceptably high risk. This is the state of Florida.
Wow.
So there's a battle going on. It's not just that the religious conservatives are over here being fanatical. It's that there are entire state governments that are protesting this incredible movement moving forward. So the concerns that we're expressing here are valid concerns. I just want to say that we're not just talking out of a place of religious conservatism. We're concerned for people's health.
I have a friend that, as a hairdresser, we were hairdressers together. She wasn't Christian at all. As a matter of fact, she was, American Indian and raised her daughter. And in that time, her daughter grew up and then professed to her mother that she was trans. And when I was talking to my friend, I was shocked that even a mother who was, pretty sophisticated according to the kind of world standard or whatever, that for her was that was problematic. She was, bargaining with her daughter. No, that's not who you are. And, I know that you're a girl and this is who you are. So that even let me know that it's not just the Christian community that struggles with the hypocrisy of what transgenderism is all about and the mutilation that goes on.
Well, it's amazing. There are a number of actually very liberal, progressive people, some of them even same-sex, homosexual, gay lifestyle, and married to a same-sex partner, who are coming down really hard on this transgender thing. And then J.K. Rowling, that wrote the Harry Potter series, is being attacked for being transphobic,
Right.
because because she's a feminist, and she knows that the reason we had, for instance, public restrooms for women is to protect women. And if you let men walk in those restrooms, you're lifting that protection.
Right.
So there's just a number of ways in which these elements are coming together, and we're not the only ones that are concerned about this.
It's frightening to me to think of, you know, these mutilating surgeries and then
Yeah.
these hormones that not just decrease the life expectancy, but also increase the rates
Right.
of cancer.
That's right.
And what about the emotional and psychological damage that happens when you throw testosterone in an environment that's producing estrogen?
Oh, I have a loved one who was in a close relationship, like a counselor kind of relationship, with a female who transitioned, and the personality changes destroyed the therapeutic relationship because she became more aggressive. I mean, put testosterone, if I took testosterone right now, I'd become more aggressive.
Yeah.
You know, it's just you haven't learned how to handle it. You know, if you're a man, you learn how to handle but it's new to the female body.
Right.
And then your personality is going to change.
Right. So I want to talk a little bit about the suicide rates among the transgender population. Do you have any information?
Very high, and it's always attributed to societal non-acceptance. But if you take those suicide rates and compare them with cultures where there's been a much higher level of acceptance, much more liberal cultures, it's the same.
Right.
And it's, again, because the underlying causes, the depression, the anxiety, substance abuse, are not being addressed. People are being diagnosed and then escorted out into a medical process. And it's really a form of, I think, malpractice.
Yeah. I've spoken to a few transgender people and some that have actually detransitioned. And the point that I really find amazing, and especially even talking with parents that have children that are moving forward to take the hormones and having these surgeries, one of the things that I'm encouraged about is in the Bible it talks about how, you know, when Jesus comes to take us, that we're changed in the twinkling of an eye. And, you know, regardless of what we've done here on this earth, and one of the people that we interviewed was Walt Heyer, who detransitioned, and he had these surgeries where he couldn't return. But how perfect that when the Lord converted him and touched his heart, for him instantly, even though his body hadn't changed, he claimed that he was the man that God had made him to be. Now, I know that the suicide rates among the transgender population is 41% actually attempt suicide, and 30% actually commit suicide, right?
Isn't that tragic?
Right, right. But I just wanted to make sure that even if somebody has begun the hormone therapy and have had some of the surgeries, that I love how God has it all covered up, and he still has the answer for anybody, no matter how far you've gone or not.
Well, what would the boil down of that answer be? I mean, to me, it seems like he himself modeled what it is to be in a body that he didn't prefer.
Right, absolutely.
You know?
And, you know, it's wonderful. I'm sure we could go on even more about this issue, but we want to make sure that everybody has access to information, and be sure to come back again and join us on more strategies for Strongholds.